But Juju is out here talking about who basically is responsible for the growth of the sport. And some people will say Caitlyn, some will say Aja, some will say Paige Beckers. Juju gave a different answer. Heck, some will say her.
Juju Watkins just made headlines for all the wrong reasons, and this one's going to leave you stunned. In a recent Forbes interview, she not only completely ignored Caitlin Clark's name, a player whose dominance has redefined women's basketball, but went out of her way to credit Aja Wilson as the driving force behind the WNBA's growth. That's right. Watkins, who's been hyped as the next big thing, couldn't even muster a mention of the one player who's undeniably drawn millions of eyes to women's hoops. Instead, she praised Wilson, whose games barely draw 500,000 viewers, as the inspiration behind the league's success.
I still saw Las Vegas Aces games with Aja Wilson this year draw under 500,000 viewers. Really, I think Caitlin Clark averaged 1.14 million or something like that, and
but here's where it gets worse. Watkins' remarks are part of a larger pattern of jealousy and pettiness that has plagued Caitlin Clark's rise to stardom. Angel Reese, Aja Wilson, and now Juju Watkins all seem united in one thing, downplaying Clark's contributions to the sport while taking cheap shots at her massive fan base.
WNBA, I'm talking players, coaches, and refs. They're all a bunch of Caitlin Clark haters. They're all a bunch of jealous haters.
Yep.
Referees are getting into it now. They're all a bunch of haters.
Is it envy? Is it something deeper? One thing is clear. Without Caitlin Clark, the league's popularity and relevance wouldn't even be in the conversation. Yet instead of rallying around her as a unifying figure, we're seeing a disturbing effort to undermine her impact.
They're moving games, putting them on big time situations.
Right.
You're jealous.
Bigger
that
rings.
was a Bush League play, and it needs to be addressed.
And I watched very, very, very physical play from the moment of the tip to the end of the game on Caitlin Clark. So I won't deny that there is a bit of an energy towards Caitlin Clark from the players.
You shouldn't hate on a person that's actually making a game big for y'all.
And this latest snub from Watkins might just take the cake. Stay tuned, because we're diving deep into how Caitlin Clark has become the undeniable hero of women's basketball and why so many can't seem to handle it.
What's a lesbian look like? Angry. You got the angry African-American lesbian who just can't handle somebody coming into their league as a white girl with a bunch of attention.
Caitlin Clark is not just a player, she's a phenomenon. Her ability to command the court and her electrifying performances have captivated millions, turning her into a household name. Let's talk about the numbers, because numbers don't lie. During last year's NCAA tournament, Clark's games drew staggering viewership numbers, peaking at over 2.5 million viewers in the playoffs.
in the playoffs, she drew 2.54 million opening round. I mean, come on. What are we doing here?
Even her regular season games regularly outpaced the WNBA Finals, where Aja Wilson's Las Vegas Aces struggled to crack 1 million viewers.
Tell me when the last time all these players been in the league all this time.
Yep.
You name all the prominent players. Tell me the time the WNBA has had this much buzz. I'll wait. Everybody in the chat that y'all was saying, oh, these women been in the league before Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. Tell me the time they had this much buzz. Tell me the time they had this many eyes on the draft. Tell me this many times they had watching WNBA preseason games. I'm just waiting. Go ahead, go ahead, chat. Take off.
If that doesn't speak to Clark's superstar status, nothing will. She's brought a level of excitement and attention to the sport that no one else, not even supposed league icons like Wilson, has achieved. It's not just viewership that sets her apart, it's the cultural shift she's creating. Clark's style of play, fearless shooting, killer court vision, and unmatched scoring ability has inspired countless young athletes and reignited interest in women's basketball.
One more thing on Caitlin, which makes her super valuable, is she is leading the WNBA in points generated, which means points scored and or points assisted on. She is leading the league by a significant margin, and she is doing this as a rookie with a Fever team that is not comprised of a bunch of all-stars.
The rise in merchandise sales, ticket sales, and fan engagement can all be tied back to her electrifying performances. Yet despite her undeniable influence, some players within the league seem determined to minimize her contributions.
There are still people who seemingly feel like they just don't want Caitlin to be a part of it. Because with Caitlin comes millions and millions and millions of more eyeballs. And with those millions and millions and millions of more eyeballs, unfortunately, is going to come some people who are not nice.
This pattern of resentment has been brewing for a while, and Juju Watkins' recent comments are just the latest example of this frustrating trend. And that brings us to Juju Watkins. She's a promising young player, no doubt, and has the potential to make waves in women's basketball. But in her recent interview, she took a different route, choosing to praise A'ja Wilson as the driving force behind the WNBA's growth instead of acknowledging Caitlin Clark's monumental contributions.
I'm not saying Juju Watkins will not be better than Caitlin Clark. We just don't know it. What I am saying is that Caitlin Clark has proven herself. If you don't like her, and then stop trying to pit every player against her, because, I mean, if she's really not that good, why are you guys trying so hard to find a replacement?
Wilson, while talented, has not come close to achieving the level of visibility or impact that Clark has brought to the game. Despite being a two-time MVP, Wilson's games consistently pull underwhelming viewership numbers, even during the WNBA Finals.
Caitlin Clark is the only player in the history of the WNBA to achieve those numbers or better. She dominates. She dominates the ball, dominates the other team's thought, dominates her own team's thought, dominates the crowd, dominates the entire area of the arena.
Watkins positioned her as the league's leading inspiration, blatantly ignoring the player who has truly transformed the sport. This deliberate omission feels more than coincidental. It highlights a deeper issue within women's basketball, an unwillingness among some players and insiders to give Clark the credit she's earned. Her success doesn't just represent her, it represents the potential of the entire league. Yet instead of supporting her, players like Watkins seem determined to sidestep her achievements. Is it jealousy? Is it rivalry? Whatever the reason, it's holding the sport back from reaching its full potential.
WNBA players and their pretend friends in the mainstream media, they have done everything they can to diminish the impact of Caitlin Clark. They tried to convince us that there are other players in the dump capable of drawing an audience. They tried to convince us that other players deserve the spotlight.
Caitlin Clark is the best thing to happen to women's basketball in years, and it's time everyone started acknowledging it. Juju Watkins' comments in her recent Forbes interview weren't just an innocent oversight, they're part of a troubling pattern among certain players in the women's basketball community. By praising A'ja Wilson as the figure behind the sport's growth, while completely ignoring Caitlin Clark, Watkins joined a growing group that seems determined to sideline Clark's contributions.
Caitlin Clark is just such a class act. She was incredible, breaking all types of records, and that's something she was certainly proud of. We saw lots of smiles on the court.
Caitlin is the face right now, and that's also good. Like, she's selling out gyms, of course. Like, why would you hate against that?
Let's break this down. While Wilson is a talented player and a two-time MVP, her influence on the growth of women's basketball pales in comparison to Clark's. Her Las Vegas Aces, despite being the WNBA champions, couldn't even draw 1 million viewers during the finals. In fact, many of her regular season games struggled to hit 500,000.
Caitlin Clark, what she's doing doesn't minimize what they've done, but we should have been giving her the credit. We saw the ratings, we saw the merchandise sales, we saw the attendance, but y'all want to make it about something else. Oh, what about the women that laid the foundation? What about this? What about it? That ain't got nothing to do with Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark is box office. She's doing this. And instead of giving her credit, y'all tried to make it about, oh, y'all poo-pooing the old guard. Y'all never talked about the old guard like this. Nah, I ain't gonna let it slide.
Compare that to Caitlin Clark, whose games brought in millions and whose every move on the court becomes a viral sensation. The numbers speak for themselves. Clark is the face of the sport, whether her rivals like it or not, but Watkins' comments didn't stop at simple praise for Wilson. The deliberate exclusion of Clark, a player who has redefined the standards of women's basketball, feels like a calculated snub. Even Angel Reese, who had her viral rivalry with Clark last season, eventually had to acknowledge her talent in interviews. Yet, here we are with Watkins, a rising star in her own right, refusing to even utter Clark's name. Instead, she framed her admiration entirely around Wilson, a player whose impact on viewership and league popularity doesn't come close to matching Clark's achievements. This isn't just a one-off incident, it's a symptom of a larger issue in the league, where certain players seem more focused on tearing Clark down than building the sport up.
We saw dirty play after dirty play on Caitlin Clark, and still, she just handled every single situation with the highest levels of dignity.
Aja Wilson's role in this dynamic can't be overlooked. As one of the WNBA's most prominent players, she's had multiple opportunities to embrace Caitlin Clark's rising stardom as a way to grow the sport collectively. Instead, Wilson has displayed a me-first attitude that borders on petty. Whether it's her dismissive comments about Clark's fan base or her silence when asked about Clark's influence, Wilson has consistently positioned herself as a rival rather than a collaborator in promoting women's basketball. This attitude trickles down, influencing younger players like Watkins, who now emulate this same dismissiveness. What should be a celebration of Clark's success and its benefits for the entire sport has instead turned into a bitter rivalry laced with unnecessary jealousy. The numbers make it impossible to argue otherwise. Caitlin Clark has moved the needle for women's basketball in a way no one else has. When she plays, ratings soar. When she steps on the court, tickets sell out. Even merchandise bearing her name flies off the shelves. Meanwhile, players like Aja Wilson, despite their undeniable talent, haven't had the same cultural impact. This isn't an opinion, it's a fact supported by data. But instead of acknowledging this, Wilson and now Watkins seem intent on downplaying Clark's contributions at every turn. It's a frustrating and frankly counterproductive approach that does nothing to help the league grow.
Caitlin Clark is becoming the best player, not because she's white, because she's that good. She's having Larry Bird impact. She's been the driving force of the hottest team in the entire league, despite her record turnovers. Why? Because she's that good. She's legit good. She's colorblind good. She's guilt-free good. She's apolitically good.
And let's not forget how much of this attitude stems from pure envy. Clark's rise to fame has been meteoric, and she's done it while staying true to her roots and focusing on the game. This authenticity resonates with fans in a way that feels genuine and inspiring. Yet players like Wilson and Watkins seem to view her popularity as a threat rather than an opportunity. The bitterness isn't just uncalled for, it's damaging. Instead of uniting to push the sport forward, these players are creating divisions that only hold women's basketball back. Watkins' comments are just the latest chapter in a saga that proves some in the sport are more focused on personal rivalries than the bigger picture. Juju Watkins' comments and Aja Wilson's attitude point to a troubling reality in women's basketball, a culture of rivalry and pettiness that's actively undermining the sport's growth. Instead of rallying behind Caitlin Clark, a player who has single-handedly brought unprecedented attention to women's basketball, we're seeing a coordinated effort to diminish her achievements. This isn't just about competitive spirit, it's about jealousy, plain and simple. Players like Watkins and Wilson see the headlines, the fan base, and the cultural buzz Clark generates, and instead of embracing it, they're doing everything they can to shift the spotlight elsewhere. Take Angel Reese as an example. Reese's viral rivalry with Clark was one of the biggest stories in sports last year, drawing millions of new fans to the game. And yet, instead of using that rivalry as a stepping stone to elevate women's basketball, Reese turned it into a race-fueled controversy, painting Clark and her fan base as part of the problem. This wasn't just a misstep, it was a deliberate effort to divide the sport at a time when unity could have brought it to new heights. Now, with Watkins ignoring Clark altogether, and Wilson continuing to act as though Clark's success is irrelevant, it's clear this issue is systemic. What makes this dynamic so frustrating is how much Caitlin Clark's success benefits everyone in the league, whether they like it or not. The increased visibility Clark has brought to the game translates to better NIL deals, higher ticket sales, and more sponsorship opportunities for all players, not just Clark herself. Juju Watkins, for example, has already landed a major NIL deal and is being touted as the future of the WNBA. But would those opportunities exist without the surge in interest Clark has generated? Unlikely. The truth is, every rising tide lifts all ships, and Clark's accomplishments have created a wave that players like Watkins and Wilson are riding, even as they work to downplay her role in it. And let's talk about Wilson's so-called dominance. Yes, she's a fantastic player. Yes, she's earned accolades. But where is the growth? Where are the packed stadiums and soaring TV ratings that her fans claim she's responsible for? The 2023 WNBA Finals, featuring Wilson's Las Vegas Aces, failed to draw even 1 million viewers. That's right, on the biggest stage with the most at stake, Wilson's games couldn't come close to the numbers Caitlin Clark pulls for a regular college game. And yet, Here we are, with Juju Watkins and others bending over backward to frame Wilson as the face of the sport. The numbers simply don't back it up. Caitlin Clark, on the other hand, doesn't need anyone to hype her up. Her game speaks for itself. Whether it's draining a three-pointer from half court or breaking yet another scoring record, she continues to prove why she's the future of basketball. Yet instead of celebrating this, players like Wilson, Reese, and now Watkins are using every opportunity to diminish her influence. It's a move that reeks of insecurity and jealousy, and it's not just unfair to Clark, it's unfair to the fans who want to see the sport thrive. Women's basketball is on the verge of something incredible, but it won't reach its full potential until this toxic culture of rivalry and pettiness is left behind. Caitlin Clark has already done more for the game of basketball than most players can dream of, and yet she continues to face unwarranted snubs from her peers. Juju Watkins' recent comments, Aja Wilson's dismissive attitude, and Angel Reese's controversial rivalry all highlight a larger problem, a failure to embrace the one player who has truly made women's basketball a must-watch event. These players should be thanking Caitlin for the future opportunities her success has created, not erasing her from the narrative. Instead, we're seeing jealousy, pettiness, and a refusal to give credit where it's due. The irony here is hard to ignore. Every time Caitlin Clark steps on the court, she's not just playing for herself, she's playing for the future of women's basketball. Her games bring in fans who might not otherwise pay attention. Her highlights go viral, putting women's basketball front and center on the sports stage. These aren't small contributions, they're transformative. Yet instead of being celebrated for these accomplishments, she's met with cold shoulders and backhanded remarks. Watkins, Wilson, and others are choosing to downplay her role rather than recognize the undeniable fact Caitlin Clark is the most important player in women's basketball today. It's time for this narrative to change. Women's basketball is at a critical juncture, with more eyes on the game than ever before. But for it to reach its full potential, it needs unity, not division. Players like Juju Watkins and Aja Wilson should be working alongside Clark to build the sport, not tearing her down out of petty jealousy. The rise of one player doesn't diminish the achievements of others. If anything, it creates a platform for everyone to succeed. But this constant undermining and exclusion of Clark only serves to hurt the sport as a whole. Fans too play a role in this. It's up to us to call out this kind of behavior and demand better. When players like Clark are unfairly targeted or ignored, it's not just an attack on one individual, it's an attack on the progress the sport has made. Caitlin Clark isn't just a great player, she's a beacon of what women's basketball can be. By supporting her and demanding respect for her contributions, we're also supporting the future of the game. So let this be a wake-up call. Women's basketball has the potential to reach unprecedented heights, but it can't do so while jealousy and pettiness take center stage. Caitlin Clark is a hero of the sport, whether her rivals want to admit it or not. The sooner players like Juju Watkins and Aja Wilson recognize that, the better off the entire league will be. Until then, we'll keep calling it like we see it, because Caitlin Clark deserves nothing less than the respect and recognition she's earned. If you're ready to dive into the latest and greatest moments in women's basketball, you're in the right place. Here on WNBA Original, we cover everything from breaking news to inspiring stories, bringing you closer to the action and the players who make it all happen. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications, so you'll always be the first to know what's happening on and off the court. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more from WNBA Original.